Color grading. That is exactly what we are talking about in this video today. And to me personally, I think it is the most magical part in the entire filmmaking process. There is nothing more satisfying as a DP or a director than seeing your footage brought to life in the hands of a skilled colorist. But how do you become a skilled colorist? Well, good news is that you're in the right place. If you stick with me for an hour or so, I will show you exactly how to get started to become a colorist, and I'll send you right on your way. If you've never used DaVinci Resolve before, don't worry, I'll go through everything that you need to know. And if you have used it before and you are familiar with the program, hopefully you can pick up a few tips and tricks along the way. By the time this video is only halfway done, you'll know everything there is to know about the color page in DaVinci Resolve, where all of the tools are, and generally how to use them. I'll talk to you a little bit about the difference between color correction and color grading, and I'll also walk you through my process of going from a program like Premiere Pro, doing a clean out as an editor, bringing that into DaVinci Resolve, doing your color correction and color grade, sending it back to the editor for them to do the final compile and to send it off to a very happy client. Now, this video is of course brought to you by Envato Elements. Envato Elements is a really easy to use subscription service that gives you unlimited downloads to millions of digital assets, including stock photography, stock footage, music, sound effects, great fonts, video templates for DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro, After Effects, and many more. And as well as that, we're talking about color grading, there is plenty of LUTs up there as well. Great colorists putting great assets up there for you to use. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the tutorial. If you haven't looked into Envato Elements, I suggest you do so today. There is a link in the description below. The licensing is super simple. You can find an asset, click a button, download it, drop it into your projects right away. Simple as that. So what are you waiting for? Go and check out the link in the description below. But what am I waiting for? How about we get into some color grading, hey? All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is obviously open up DaVinci Resolve. So let's do that right now. I'm working in DaVinci Resolve Studio 17. Studio is the paid version of DaVinci Resolve. There's gonna be a few tools that I use that are only in the paid version, but most of this is in the free version. And any of the tools that I do use in the paid version, they're nice to haves, they're not need to haves. So you can definitely follow along with the free version here. I'll do my best to point out where I'm using a tool that I know is in the paid version, but I might miss a few, so bear with me. When you first open DaVinci Resolve, you're greeted with this. So I'm gonna treat you as if you've never used this before. So if you have used it before, bear with me for a little bit here. We're welcoming the new folk into DaVinci Resolve here. And you know, if you have used it, maybe you'll pick up a few things along the way. But before we get into it, I just wanna go through a few very basic, rudimentary, fundamental things that you're going to need to know when you start up DaVinci Resolve for the first time. So when you open up DaVinci Resolve for the first time, you're greeted with this screen here. You can see here, I've got an old projects bin, but usually you just have the untitled project here. Usually when you open up a program, it'll ask you where you want to save things. With DaVinci, it kind of creates its own database locally on your computer. If you want to change that, say if you're working off a hard drive or a server or something like that, there's a very easy way to change that location. So if you click on this little button up here, that's going to expand your menu, and you'll find that a few times throughout the program. So if you're ever lost and you're trying to find some more menu items that you know are supposed to be there, click that little button just at the top left there. So this here, you can see we've got our database set to local, and that just means that it's saved to a folder on my MacBook here. But if you want to add your own disk, what you can do is go new database down here. Make sure you've selected disk here, hit browse and navigate to where you want to put it. So I'm just going, for the sake of it, to put it in this scratch disk folder here. Hit open, we'll call it scratch disk 2, and then we'll hit create. So in a moment here, you'll see it pop up on the left-hand side. It will create a new database here called Scratch Disk 2. Now that is of course on my MacBook here because I didn't have any external hard drives plugged in or servers connected. But if you did want to add a hard drive or a server, you'll see that they'll be down in this section here where they usually are. And that's how you can add those. All right, so I'm just going to go back to local database here and work in this untitled project so we can see what Resolve looks like from scratch. Now, if you are not familiar with the program, let me quickly run through it for you. So at the bottom of the page here, you've got Media, Cut, Edit, Fusion, Color, Fairlight, and Deliver. Now, what is all of that? That's basically your entire Adobe suite in one program here. So Media would be like your assembly tab in Premiere. Cut is where you do kind of assembly edits, similar to Premiere. Edit is where you actually put your edits together. Very similar to Premiere again, or like Final Cut Pro or any other non-linear editor. You'll be very familiar with this if you're familiar with those editors here. Now, Fusion is effectively After Effects if we're using the Adobe example. It is our compositor and VFX software. Fusion is node-based, whereas After Effects and other compositors like that are generally layer-based. You know, there's a lot of great things that you can do with Fusion here. It is a bit of a learning curve going from layout to node. Moving on, we've got the color tab. Obviously, we're going to go through that in great detail in this tutorial, so stand by for that. Fairlight over here is the audio application, a very powerful tool if you're editing in DaVinci Resolve. Even if you want to finish your projects in here as well, from an audio sense, super powerful as well. And then moving on to deliver, as you can probably work out, this is where we render everything and deliver everything off to our clients or our editors or whoever it is that we are passing this on to. This will be very similar to Media Encoder, I guess, if we're still drawing the comparisons to Adobe here. All right, we'll go back to the media tab now. And before we bring in any media and we start our color grade, let's go down to the little cogwheel down here in the bottom right-hand corner. This is our settings. So the first thing I'm going to do is change my timeline frame rate here to 25 frames per second. By default, it's in 24. I work in a PAL country, I'm in Australia, so we're 25. I know I'm going to be bringing in 25 frames per second footage to color grade, so I'm going to change it there. You can, of course, also change your timeline resolution here as well. I'll show you another place to do that very shortly. For me, I always deliver, for the most part, in 1920 by 1080, so I rarely change this. But if you do need to change this to any other resolutions, this is where you can do it. Be aware though, the higher the resolution, obviously the harder your computer needs to work. I found this is pretty good. Pretty much everything else is set up by default the way that you would want it. Please feel free to jump through all of these settings. You might have a use case where you need to change very specific things. For instance, you might be importing camera raw files, in which case you can go to camera raw and change all your raw profiles here. For me, the only other thing I would like to show you here is in color management. You may not be actually delivering anything for broadcast. You might not be doing TVCs. You might not be doing anything for TV. But if you are, or if you're likely to in the future, just tick this little box, make broadcast safe. And that's basically adding a little safety blanket for you to make sure that you're not exceeding any of those broadcast safe IRE levels. All right, so that's it. We're gonna hit save now and we're gonna move into it. So we need to bring some media into here so we can actually start to color grade. So there's a couple of ways to do that. You can go to this little twirl down here and start going through your files, or you can just go into a Finder window, and if you know where your file is, you can drag it in. I've done that, and you can see it's twirled down the menus to exactly where that is. Now, you can drag this down into the media pool. From here, you can right click on it and hit Create New Timeline using selected clips. Now, we've just gone through our project settings, so I know they're correct, but if you wanted to untick this, this is where you can change that. Again, you can change your timeline resolution, you can change your frame rate. There's a few other settings you can change as well. Mismatch resolution, this is a good one. So scale entire image to fit, which basically means instead of just punching in on the image, it's going to scale the image up or down to your timeline. Should it be different than your timeline resolution? For the sake of this, I'm just going to hit use project settings because I know it's correct, and we'll just rename this color grading tutorial. So now if we double click on this one that we've just made here, that's going to open up in the edit window and we can start color grading. You can see here, all of our files are in here and that's perfect. We want to go over to the color tab here and start color grading, and oh no, what's happened? The entire thing has been graded with our beautiful magenta grade here. That's clearly not what we want to do. So let's go back to the media tab here. How do we overcome that? How do we get our individual clips in? Well, I'm going to delete these. Let's start again. So what I'm going to show you is a very typical workflow for me in particular, and countless other colorists and editors. Basically, if you've got an editor who's worked in another program, say Premiere Pro, and they've done their edit and it's now coming to you as the colorist to complete the color correction and color grade, and then after that, you'll send it back to them to finalize. There's a couple of like really easy tricks that you can do in DaVinci Resolve to help with that workflow. Effectively, what we need to do is ask our editor for a clean out, which is basically their entire edit with no graphics, with no LUTs, with nothing else on it other than the footage cut into the final edit. How do we get those cuts into here so we can grade every clip individually? I'm going to show you how to do that right now. On this clip here, which is our full edit, we right click and we go Scene Cut Detection. From here, it opens up the Scene Cut Detection window, and automatically, if you hit Auto Scene Detect, it's going to go through and find all of your cuts. Now, the way you can see if this has worked, if you click over here and just use your mouse arrows up and down to go through the different cuts, you want to make sure the 2 frames on the right-hand side, these 2 frames here, are identical, and the 1 frame on the left-hand side is different. And that denotes where it has actually detected that there is a cut and has made that cut for you. So we're going to keep going down through this and make sure all of those are identical. And they are identical. You can also scrub through it as well, just to make sure things have actually worked. I know specifically with this piece that one doesn't work. So let's find it and we'll add our own cut here. So you can see this clip here of this delicious little deconstructed falafel bowl here, and then this very fattening peanut butter sandwich. If you go just in between, find that cut. There you go. I've just scrubbed through with my left and right arrows here. You can see there is the 2 identical shots on the right and 1 solo shot on the left. And just go add. Down here, you can add one, and now we've got that cut in there as well. Now that we've got all those cuts and we're happy, hit down on the bottom right-hand side, add cuts to media pool, and that's done that in the background. So you can close this scene cut detection window now, and you've got all of your cuts right here. So if you highlight all of these, I've just done that with Command A. Now I am on a Mac, so I'm going to do Command. If you're on a PC, you know what to do, hit Control. Command A, right click, create new timeline using selected clips. And just as we did before, we know these project settings are correct. So I'm going to call this color grading tutorial yet again, hit create, and it's created this right here. I'm double clicking on it and it's moved us into the edit tab. So you can see we've got our edit pulled directly from Premiere, and I know it's from Premiere because I cut this, into DaVinci Resolve, ready to color grade. So let's move over to the color grading tab. Now, if you're not familiar with the color grading window, what I'm going to do briefly is walk you through it, start to finish, in as brief a way as I can, but also with as much depth as possible to make sure that basically by the end of this video, you know everything on here, you know how it works, and you can just jump into color grading your footage, you know, like yesterday. Also, keep in mind that this is my color grading process. I've worked mostly as an editor and then a colorist, and you know, I'm very used to that round trip going from Premiere into DaVinci, back into Premiere. So I've kind of tailored my process to how I work. There's plenty of different ways to color grade, and there is no one right way, and there's no wrong way to do it really. If you get an image at the end of your session that you're happy with and that your clients are happy with, then you're a colorist. But yeah, hopefully I can show you some tips and tricks along the way. And I'd really like to hear if you've got a different way of doing things, please let me know in the comments. I'm always learning and always ready to learn more. So from top left to bottom right, this is the color tab. We've got the gallery up the top here, which is this section here. It says no stills created. Now, what's this section for? Well, for me, the way I use it, let's just say in this clip that we've got in the window up here, if this was our grade, we wanted to push it to purple, very stylized. We can right click on here if we're happy with this grade, right click on here, grab still, and that's gonna send a still over here. But what does that actually mean? Well, it means if we go to another clip within our timeline, let's say it's this one right here, and we hover our mouse over here, you can see that grade is applied. It's effectively a quick way of making a LUT in the program. If I right click on this and go apply grade, that grade is now applied to this piece of footage, and it was as easy as that. So this is really a simple way of creating a look on one piece of footage that you know can easily then be replicated across the rest of your footage. So for instance, we've got multiple clips here from the same camera. If we did the grade just on this clip here, and then we copied it over to this one, this one, this one, this one, and so forth. Therefore, we know we're getting a consistent grade the entire way through, and we don't have to do it from scratch on every piece of footage. So let's go back here, let's reset this node grade because no one wants a big bowl of purple. Next up here, we've got LUTs. So in a similar fashion to what we just did was basically create a very quick LUT in our footage here. We can also import LUTs and use the LUTs that come as part of DaVinci Resolve. Now, if you're not familiar, a LUT or a lookup table is effectively, in the most layman's terms possible, an Instagram filter for your footage. There's going to be a lot smarter people who can tell you exactly how a lookup table works, and it's quite interesting. But for the sake of this, it's applying I guess a predetermined look to your footage. So one way to use them really effectively is in the color correction process. Just to go on that a little bit further, there's color grading and color correction. Color correction is taking footage that's been shot either raw or in a log profile, which means that you're capturing as much latitude as possible in your image and not applying any in-camera colorization. And then in a program like DaVinci Resolve, you color correct it back to either a neutral starting point to then move on to your grade, or if you're going for a natural look, color correcting it to a natural look. So this footage I shot actually a few years ago with Hayden here, who you'll see in the footage. We've never actually done anything with it, so I thought this was the perfect place for it to see the light of day. Because I shot it, I know that this camera was an Ursa Mini 4.6K G2. So if we go up to here, Blackmagic Design, you can see here, if I run my mouse over this, you're going to start to see the inbuilt LUTs applied. Very similar to how we use the grab still and apply grade before. You can right click on here and apply LUT to current node. There you go. We've now got a relatively balanced piece of color correction here that then we can push further into a color grade or a more determined look. But I'm gonna reset that node grade there. You can see if I run my mouse over a bunch of these different ones, you're going to get different effects depending on what we're going for. These ones are all built into DaVinci Resolve. These ones down here are actually some LUTs that I got from Envato Elements. Now, Envato Elements, there's plenty on there and there's a lot of great content to use, but specifically if we're talking about color grading, you'll find some fantastic colorists on there who have put up different packs to either get cinematic looks, film looks, really good stuff for wedding photographers as well to kind of get that almost ethereal, bleachy, like whitewashed look as well. So if you are working in a specific field like that, like wedding videography, and you want to get some really fantastic LUTs, check out Envato Elements. Link in the description below. So here we'll look at what a LUT can do when you're talking about color grading versus color correction. Now this is going to be very intense, but if we wanted to go a really nice teal and orange look, we could do that. Looks pretty wacky on this piece of footage here. Let's see what it looks like on Hayden's master shot here. Get a nice sharp frame of him. He looks a little bit confused there. There we go, that's nice, him smiling. That's very, very moody, but you can see with just one click of a button how far we could take this look. There you go, that's a little less moody, really orange there. But that's not what we're here to do. We are here to color correct and then color grade from scratch. And we want to do more than just slap a one-size-fits-all correction over the image. So we'll move on from the LUTs section here. We'll keep Hayden's smiling face up here. Media Pool is just that. It's exactly what we saw over here on the Media tab, but it's easily accessible in your Color tab here. For my process, I don't really use Media Pool in the Color tab. Getting rid of that. Moving over here to Timeline, you'll see down here, it brings up a little timeline of your footage. You can see this is the clip selected here, and where you are within it. I find I tend to just use this timeline scrubber. So to save a little bit of extra room, I generally have that switched off so that I've got more room to play with down here. The next up, we've got clips, and as you can imagine, that does exactly the same thing. It's good to have these clips up, especially when you start to get into the end game of your grade where you're making sure that all of your clips are actually matching each other. You're not going from like one very blue look to one very orange look. You want to keep it nice and consistent throughout. This is a very quick and easy way to see that because as you can see here, if I push this really to magenta, it shows up in the clip view down here. Dropping clips away, again, to give us a little bit more room, we move on to nodes. This is the section here. This is where you do all of your grading. This is the workhorse of the color tab. You can zoom in and out here with this little slider. We keep the nodes tab open pretty much the entire time. Next to that, you've got effects. I'll go into effects a little bit later on, but you can see here, there's a bunch of different effects that you can add to different nodes within the color grading section here. A really good thing to use, and I'll do this at the end, is like finishing effects. So any little bits of blur or like film grain, things like that, to really start to push your look in the right direction. There's a really cool tool as well called, let's see if I can remember what it's called. Oh yes, halation and light rays. Using those two in conjunction with each other, especially when you've got a little bit of light in the background, maybe practical lamps, it looks really cool. Moving on from that, we're going down to the bottom left here. This is the section where we do all of our grading. This is the main tool along with the nodes. This is the main place where you're going to work. On the front tab over here, very left, you've got camera raw. I mentioned a little bit before that if you want to change your camera raw settings, you can do that in the settings here. This is what that also pertains to. You can see Arri Alexa here is what we had set. We're not shooting with camera raw here, so we're going to move on to color match. If you have a color checker and you shoot a frame of your color checker at the start of your shoot, you can bring that frame in, you pull a window over that frame and basically hit match, and it will go through and make sure that blues are blues, yellows are yellows, whites are whites, blacks are blacks, all of that kind of thing. It's a nice way to start to get a very quick color balance across all of your footage. For this, we're not going to use it because I didn't shoot it. Primaries color wheels is where I spend most of my time. Very similar to curves. If you're used to using curves in other programs, there's a little bit of a learning curve, no pun intended, but it does the same thing. It's basically playing with your hues and saturation, as well as the levels of your luminance within the image, in your mids, your highs, and your shadows. Within the color wheels section, you've also got color bars. I don't usually use that much. It does similar things to color wheels primaries. And then you've got primaries log wheels as well. The difference between primaries color wheels and primaries log wheels: primaries color wheels is non-destructive, primaries log wheels is destructive to the image. You would use primaries color wheels for all of your color correction and then basically starting to build out the grade. I actually use it for all, I don't really touch the log wheels. Some colorists move into the log wheels to kind of push that grade right at the end. When they know that all of the work has already been done, they don't need to worry as much about the structural integrity of the image and they can push it really far. We're going to stick with primaries color wheels today. Next up, we've got HDR. Now look, I don't ever really work with HDR content at all or deliver for it. But if you want us to dive deeper into this HDR wheels, let us know in the comments and maybe that'll be the next video. But right now we're gonna skip past that. Moving over to the RGB mixer, I don't really use this at all. It's very similar to the color bars over here, you can see. But yeah, it's not something I use a huge amount in my process. Maybe you do, but we're gonna skip past that for today. And then over here, you've got your motion effects, which is where your noise reduction comes in. You've got your temporal noise reduction, your spatial noise reduction, and then in here as well, motion blur for the project. Moving across, we've got the curves section. Now curves should be very familiar to you if you're used to working in other programs like the Lumetri tab in Premiere or the color grading tools in Final Cut Pro and other places, and also photography as well in things like Lightroom. So over here as well, you can change, all of the color channels at once, or you can unchain and you can select, say, just the red, the green, the blue, etc. We'll keep that chained up for now. You can also do some more micro adjustments through this section as well. Across the top here, this is where you've got different versions of it. So you've got hue versus hue, you've got hue versus saturation, you've got hue versus luminance, luminance versus saturation, saturation versus saturation, and then finally saturation versus luminance. With this pop out here, with most things, you can pop that out and see it slightly larger. If you exit out of that, it just drops back down as you were. The next one over here is the color warper. Now this is a relatively new tool. I believe this is new in DaVinci Resolve 17. I have not played around with it a huge amount. I'll try and use it a little bit in this process just to see how it works, but maybe that's a video for another time. Effectively how it does work though, if I move my pointer around the image here, you can see this little yellow box darting around the color warper. Let me bring this out a little bit more so you can see it. If we move it around, you can see the yellow box darting around. And effectively what that means is, all right, I want to grab this green color here and I want to shift that green up to like a purple color. So it means that you can get quite granular with the colors in the image. And it also kind of is quite tactile. It makes a lot of sense to be like, all right, I want to grab this kind of white color here and then I want to move that up to magenta. Obviously that looks awful. So that's not what we want to do, but that's how the color warper works in a nutshell. Moving on here, we've got the qualifier. Now the qualifier is used to grab skin tones. If you click the little magic wand button up here or hit Shift H, you can see here what we've actually grabbed. If I wanted to just isolate his arms here, or even just like isolate different parts of the image, like the green, let's say the green in this image. But obviously it's getting a little bit messy here. I'll show you how to clean that up later on. That's definitely going to be an integral part of my process, which is where we start to grab skin tones and we play with skin tones there. So I'll turn that off for now. Again, you can make a lot of adjustments down here. Moving on to the window tool here. This is basically just to add a little power window. So everything within this will be affected. If I jump over here quickly and just say I wanted to, make that purple, you can see everything within that is affected. If I wanted to invert that, it will be everything outside of that is affected. And you can also use that pen tool to do little mats around people as well. Again, that will come into play in my process. So we'll move into that later on. Moving quickly past window, we've got the tracker window. Basically, that just means we can motion track any power windows that we've made in this section to the image so that, if we're trying to just track someone's face through the image and we've changed the color of it, it's going to actually stay through the entire image and not just have this one block where the face was when we were doing the grade and then the face moves away and then you've got that block. Over here, we've got Magic Mask. This, I'm 99% sure, is in the paid version of DaVinci Resolve. I don't really use it that much because it's relatively new. I'm learning more about it every day. But it is good for, say, if you want to grab a person out of the image like this to change them, if you want to bring them a little bit up or drop the shadows down behind them, you can just highlight the person, and we've got it over on person here. You can also do features, but I'm going to do person. And then if you click this little toggle mask overlay button over here, you can see it's grabbed Hayden pretty well. Now, it doesn't need to be as accurate as rotoscoping because at the end of the day, we're just doing a color grade. We're not actually separating someone completely from the background or trying to replace the background or anything like that. So effectively what you've done there is just grabbed a part of the image so that you can isolate it and then make any changes that you want to make. It is actually pretty handy, especially if you've got a lot of movement in the scene and you want to just track one person throughout. Really good for that. Going to reset here and move on. We've got blur, sharpening, and we've also got mist here as well. So this is where we can add some sharpness to our image, or we can blur the image. Mist here as well is kind of useful in things where you're doing beauty or fashion as well. So if you're working in that industry, something good to know and learn how to use. Moving on here, key. So basically in a node-based editor, key is effectively what your opacity would be in a layer-based editor. So that's where you can change the opacity of anything that you've done, any of your nodes. So if you've got a LUT on the first node, but it's a little bit too strong, you want to bring that opacity down. This is where you can do that. Finally, over here, you can change the sizing and make any tweaks to your image here, but we're not going to do that because we've been given this footage from an editor. All we're doing is making color correction and color grading tweaks here. We are not making any editorial changes because we want to just send that back to them so that they can drop it back into their edit and export to their client. We don't want to get in the middle of that, so we won't be using this at all. I promise we're almost ready to get into the color grading tutorial here, but a couple of tiny things to go. I did say at the start, you're going to be an expert on the color tab by the end of this, and the video is not even nearly over, and you're probably already an expert. Over here, you've got keyframes. The tracker works really well in this, but if you do want to make any tweaks, you can do that here. And then you've got scopes. Scopes are really important for what we're doing. In the way that I've got DaVinci set up right now, I've got it in single screen mode because I'm just recording one screen. You can change that up here in workspace. You can go to dual screen, turn that on, and then you can pick which one your primary display is. You can also do the video clean feed, which is what we're seeing here. You can change that to be on your secondary display. So in this case, it would be my MacBook here, and I'd be able to see just that image as well as all of this on this screen as well. But because we're in single screen mode and you might only have one screen, if you pop this out here, it's going to give you all of your scopes in one, rather than just seeing them as one unit down here. Now, scopes can be a little bit intimidating when you first start looking at them and when you first start color grading, but chances are you've come across scopes in one way or another if you're capturing video as a cinematographer or a videographer, or if you've done photography as well, you'd be probably familiar with a histogram, or if you've done any post-production on those, if you've done any coloring in Lumetri or in Resolve as well, you will have seen scopes before. But let me take you through them very quickly so you can gather an understanding about what each one does and how to read them, because reading scopes is key to becoming a great colorist. You might not be working on the best monitors in the world. They might not be calibrated correctly. The really high-end, like Flanders Scientific color grading monitors are upwards of $30,000. I'm sure most people are not using those. I'm certainly not using those. So knowing how to read scopes is very important when it comes to color grading because it's actually showing you what's in your image from a technical standpoint versus just what you're seeing by eye on your monitor. So being able to read scopes is very important because you obviously can't control everyone else's monitors and what they're viewing your content on. So if you're reading the scopes and you're going by the scientific technical data, then you should be on the right track. So what we've got here is we've got Parade, Waveform, Vectorscope, and Histogram. These are the main scopes that you will use throughout most of your color grading process. For me, I mostly look at Waveform and Parade, and I kind of use those in conjunction with each other. And then when I get into skin tone, I look at the Vectorscope. Histogram's helpful to have there, but it basically does the same thing as Parade and Waveform. But let me take you through it very briefly. This window as well, you can do a 1-up view of any of the scopes that you would like. The same as that, you can do a 2-up view or a 4-up view. In this little section here, you can change a few different things. So you can turn a low pass filter on, which cleans up a little bit of the noise in the image. I'm going to turn that off for now because by default, this is what it looks like. You can play around with these settings if you would like. You can also turn on display qualifier focus, which I think is really handy for newcomers, especially if you're a little bit intimidated by scopes as you're starting out. This is a really good way to learn what you're seeing in the scopes versus what's in your image. So if you turn the qualifier on down here, if I run my mouse over the image now with the qualifier on, you'll see these circles pop up on the scopes, and it's basically showing you exactly what you're seeing. So if I go to his shirt here in the waveform, you can see that's that nice big white section in the middle. And you're starting to go, okay, well, that makes sense. If I go to the car over here, it's orange. You can kind of see that in the left on the waveform here, and then obviously in the parade pushing into the red channel. And then let's say we'll go to this green section over here, which has obviously got a lot of blue in the shadow as well. And you can see where that's sitting in all of our scopes. I'm actually going to turn it off for the sake of this because it becomes a little bit distracting, but please know that it's there and turn it on if you are a beginner and you're having trouble reading where things are in your image. Now for each of these, you have a little drop down here as well, and that just means you can change what scope you're seeing in what section. So I'll keep it as default, and they all have individual settings as well. So colorize, you can turn that off for parade, but it doesn't make much sense. So we'll keep that on. You can also put the luminance channel into your parade as well. But because we look at the luminance in the waveform, I tend to just keep that on RGB. Now moving over to the waveform, again, you can have it RGB and colorized, which I currently have. And you can see here, it's showing the RGB channels through there. If I turn colorize off, it's just showing the luminance here, but it's still showing the luminance relative to the RGB channels. I'm just going to show it purely with the luminance channel there. So what we're looking at here is effectively the brightness of the image. And what we're having a look over in the parade is the brightness of the color channels within the image. So we'll stick with waveform for a moment here. And you can see 0 is absolute black, 1023 is absolute white. So we've got nothing that's actually hitting black in this image because what we're looking at is a piece of log footage. So everything's kind of squished into the middle here to give us the most latitude in post. But you can see that there are some moments where things are clipping slightly, and you can see that's these lights in the background and on the car here. So that's what we'll be clipping. So I wouldn't worry too much about that because we know what that is in the image. So you can kind of ignore that. You wouldn't go, oh, I can't possibly push this any higher in the highlights because we're already clipping. There are some exceptions to be made. So if I pull the luminance of the shadows down here, you can see we're going towards black. And if I just hit that line there on 0, then we're now seeing sort of absolute black in his pants in this area here. On the left-hand side here, it's just sitting above. Let's pull it down. Now that's absolute black. If we reset this and do the same with the highs, you can push that there and see his t-shirt is now clipping through. And if we really push it, you can see what I'm talking about there. So the waveform is a graph that plots the luminance of each pixel against a horizontal position. So 0 is black, 1023 is white, and then everything in the image, every pixel in the image is from left to right here. So if I just turn the qualifier on again, you can see as I go left to right, it's tracking through the scope here. But if I push up and down, it's actually not going to the top of the graph. So you would say, all right, well, I'm on the left here, so therefore it's on the left in the waveform, and I'm on the right here, so therefore it's on the right in the waveform. You would think maybe, all right, well, if I'm at the bottom here, if I push to the top, then it's going to sit up here in the waveform, but that's not correct because we're only plotting the data against the horizontal position. So the highest I can go in this section is basically the brightest pixel. So let's say this bright pixel here is the one at the very top, same one over here, but then this bright pixel in the middle is only sort of sitting halfway up. That's what we mean by it's plotted against the horizontal position, and the vertical doesn't actually matter in this. So I'm going to turn the qualifier off again. So that's the luminance in the waveform, and then the parade is exactly the same thing. It's 3 of the exact same graphs next to each other, but instead of measuring the overall luminance, it's measuring the luminance of the red, green, and blue channels. So let's just, for the sake of it, push this to blue. You see that the luminance of blue is going up. And then because we've got a lot of blue in the highlights, if I push this here, the luminance of blue is going up towards the top of the graph, towards white, which is luminance. That looks awful, so we'll reset this. The same as if I push to red, the same as if I push to green. Again, that looks awful. So parade and waveform are very handy to use in conjunction with each other. You can have a 2-up view here and just go like that. And then we'll move to histogram very quickly. It's basically the exact same thing as parade and waveform, except it's turned on its side. So on the left here is absolute black, and then on the right here is absolute white. And then you have the levels for the R, G, and B channels here as well. So if we push up in the reds here, you can see the red channel is pushing towards white, increasing the luminance. And then if we did the same thing with the blues here, the blues would be pushing towards white, and the other channels would be dropping down towards black. So increasing and decreasing the luminance of specific color channels. Moving to the Vectorscope is very different to the Parade, Waveform, and Histogram, which are all relatively similar and plotting similar data. All of your pixels are plotted right in the middle of this graph here, this little white splodge. That is all the pixels in our image. Anything that is exactly in the middle of this cross is absolute white. The color wheel is represented here. You can see we've got magenta, blue, cyan, green, yellow, and red. The further out towards the edge of the circle you go, the more saturation you have. So if I push towards magenta here, you can see that we're saturating towards magenta. We're pushing towards that magenta side and we're coming out from the center towards magenta and we're saturating in that direction. If I just crank the saturation up, you'll see we push out towards the edge of the circle just in a uniform direction. If you draw an imaginary line between yellow and red or red and magenta, and we push towards that direction, in this one, I'm gonna just do between yellow and red and go all the way, you'll see it's drawing an imaginary line here because we've actually hit the limit of what our color space will be able to display. If I go towards cyan and blue, you're gonna see a similar thing. And then obviously if I push up towards magenta as well, you'll see actually magenta allows you to go much further, and this has got to do with the color space that we're working in. So let me demonstrate that very quickly by switching over to a graph that I don't really use that often, but it shows you here the Rec 709 color space. This is kind of what we're able to push into. And if I just saturate this all the way up, you see I've just saturated all the way towards red there, and I'll change that saturation back. If I push all the way into magenta here, you can see that hitting that line into red in the corner there, pulling around into green. Now this is hard on a mouse. And then pushing over into blue. That's the line that we're talking about. You can't go past that in the color space. So if I reset this back and go back to our Vectorscope and push this again to magenta, hitting that line there, and then red, hitting that line there, you kind of understand what I'm looking at. Now, this line that's showing up here, you can toggle this on and off here. This is the show skin tone indicator line. And this shows sort of perfect skin tone, and we can zoom in as well. So show 2x zoom. So basically for skin tone, you want to sit on or to the right of that line. Let's just, for the sake of this, go to the offset wheel here and push this a little bit to the right. That would be where we want our skin tone to sit. Anything to the left starts to get a little bit green and a little bit kind of, witchy undertones. So that's our skin tone indicator there. So basically, err on the side of caution, always sit on the right-hand side or on that line. But if you've got to push it to the right, don't push it to the left. So that's our scopes. Very important to understand how to read these going forward in your color grading journey. We'll refer to this throughout. I'm going to keep it down here for the time being. I'll pop it out when we need it. How about that? So that we can see as much as we can. So that's the color page here. I promised you I'd tell you everything you needed to know about it, and I have, but we're ready. We're ready to get into the color grading tutorial. So let's do that. All right, first things first, now that we're into our color correction and color grade, we want to set up a little bit of a node tree. But first of all, I'm just going to find a piece of footage that we're going to work on. I think this one here is quite vibrant. You've got a lot of skin in it. You've got a color that's very close to skin as well, but that we want to change and make a little bit more, I guess, we want to make it pop. So this is going to be a great example to use. We'll find kind of like our hero frame that we're going to use throughout, and it's basically this first frame here, so that's great. And we'll start to set up our node tree. So you can do this as you work, or you can do this kind of at the start, so you can lay your pathway out and know what you need to do next. I like to do it at the start, it keeps me organized. If you click on this node here and hit Option S, you can add in a new node. And the way this works, if you haven't worked in a node editor before, everything on the left flows through to everything on the right, but it doesn't flow back the other way. So if I make a big change here on the left, it obviously happens on the right as well. But if I make that same change just on the number 2 node here, you see it doesn't happen on the number 1 node. That's because things flow from left to right and don't flow back the other way. So the way I set up my node tree structure, and again, this is the way I've been doing it. If you've got different ways to do it, please let me know. I know there's a bunch of colorists who use this kind of structure as well, and then have, different branches as well on the tree that they employ for different techniques where the footage calls for it. But for my standard, all right, I need to go in and do a more intense grade than just putting a LUT on it and tweaking things. This is my structure. I start with noise reduction. So I'm going to hit Control L here and label it. So I'm going to call this noise reduction. This second one will be my balance, Control L balance. Bring that down here. The next one, which I'm doing with Option S to add a node, is going to be my skin, but I'm also going to make that a layer node. So I'm going to hit Option L to make a layer underneath. So we'll say with nodes that anything below is what takes precedence versus with a layer-based editor, which is things that are on top take precedence. So in this layer section here, the node that is below is actually what is taking precedence and is, I guess, sitting on top in the image. Just keep that in mind. I'm going to label this one skin. That's Control L and then skin. And this one I'm going to call ambience. Ambience there. And then that gets mixed into the layer mixer here. I'm going to add another node here, Option S, and that's going to be called, what are we going to call that? We're going to call that our look. And then finally, after that, we're going to do our effects. So another one there, Option S, Control L, and we'll call this effects. We might want to do some effects at the end, maybe something with a little bit of film grain or something like that. So we'll keep that there for later on. This is my basic structure. So I start off with balance. I actually don't start off with noise reduction, and I'll show you why later on. You can see when we get into the skin tone section, the noise reduction comes in really handy, and it's really easy to demonstrate it there. So I'm going to leave that for that section. So moving into balance here, I'll bring up my scopes actually, and I'm going to drop my clips down here so I've got more room to work with, bringing up my scopes, popping them out. So you can see what's happening. What we want to do is we want to use the Primaries color wheels to balance our image and start to push it in the right direction. We don't want to color grade in here. We want to color correct in our balance. You want to start with a balanced image. So then when you get into tweaking specific parts of your image, like skin or maybe the cheese in this example, we might change. You can change it from there. And then moving into the look section, that's where you change the overall feeling of the grade versus the correction of all the elements. So the Primaries color wheels, this is how it works. You've got lift, gamma, gain, and offset. Lift is your shadows, gamma is your midtone, gain is your highlights, offset is the entire image. Each one of these, you've got the wheel, obviously the color wheel represented there. If you grab this little dot in the middle and push to one side, you're pushing towards that color and you're saturating in that direction. With this jog wheel underneath, if you pull to the left, I'm clicking here and dragging. If you pull to the left, you're bringing down the luminance. If you pull to the right, you are increasing the luminance. And that again is of your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights. You can see here on the lift one, if I pull the shadows down and then push the shadows up, the highlights and the mids don't actually move that much. Whereas with the offset, it's going to move everything in either direction. You've then got some other tools for temperature, obviously your white balance correction here with temperature and tint. You've got contrast, pivot, mid detail. We'll get into mid detail and skin, really handy for skin. You've got some color boost, shadows, highlights, saturation at the bottom here. These are different tools that you can use to start bringing color into your image. And the first thing that I'm going to do is actually just crank the saturation all the way up so we can see what we're working with. And you'll see what's happened there if I go Command Z to go back. Have a look at our scopes when I push the image all the way up in terms of saturation. We've gone from what looks like a relatively balanced image to pushing it all the way up and going, oh, actually there's way more reds in this than we thought. And the blues are a little more prevalent in the shadows here. And you can start to see that in his apron. He's obviously got blue and white stripes in his apron. And then we've got this vibrant orange wall, as well as all of the oranges and reds in his skin. And then the yellows and oranges here in the cheese. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we want to balance things out a little bit. We've got a bit too much blue in the shadow, so I'm going to play around with that. And you'll see here, I'm just doing completely little micro adjustments just to rebalance some things here. We don't want to go too far because we still like a little bit of that blue in the shadows and we don't want to change our skin tones too much. So just adjusting it to around about there. That's for our shadows. Our highlights here, I'm going to grab and adjust that as well. Obviously, I pull a bit of red out of there. Add a little bit of green and then balance out our blue. Don't want to go too far again. I'm pretty happy with that. And then in our mids here, we'll do the same and we'll kind of do the mids by eye. And I'm looking mostly at his skin tone here because everything else we can fix later on. So I'm relatively happy with that. Now I'm actually just going to pull the saturation back to maybe 85% because it was getting a little bit too much. And then we want to add a little bit more contrast in. So we can do that with contrast here, either push or pull. But what I'm going to do is Command Z, undo that. And I'm going to do contrast with our jog wheels at the bottom of our lift, our gamma, and our gain. I'm going to pull the lift down here so that the blacks are sitting just on black. And again, these blacks are actually blue. But you'll see here in the part of the image, this little handle here and the bottom of his blue stripes here are pulled down towards the black. I'm relatively happy with the highlights. Let's just drag it and see by eye. Pretty happy with that there. And we're going to change some stuff on his skin later on. So I'm kind of looking at the cheese in this section. The highlight on the cheese here is what I'm looking at. And then our mids, this is kind of just to taste. Happy with it there. So if we go up to this little guy here and we click on or off, you can see the full grade that we've done so far. And that's just in our balance. We've gone from what looks like a pretty drab, almost green now that we're looking at it, image to a pretty vibrant, don't worry, we're going to pull it back, but a pretty vibrant first pass. You can see as well in our Vectorscope down here, you can see that our skin tone is sitting kind of right on the skin tone line here. Going to shut these down for a second so we can move on to the next part here, moving on to skin tone. So in our skin tone node here, the first thing we want to do is go to the qualifier tool down here, and we want to grab the skin. And you're going, well, nothing's happened. Well, if you hit Shift H or this little magic wand tool up here, you'll see what we've actually grabbed. And it's done a pretty good job of grabbing the skin here, but we've got a lot of the wall and the cheese as well, which is not necessarily a bad thing because they are similar tones, but we'll just try and get a bit of a cleaner pull across here. It's kind of done it even worse. But I do really want to make sure his knuckles here are what gets grabbed because I'm going to play around with the highlights in there. So I will do that, and you can see it's grabbed a lot more of the image, and you can also see a lot of that noise showing up in the image now. So this is a good time, as I mentioned earlier, to look at what noise reduction does. So I'll go back into my noise reduction node here, and again, we're pre-grade because this is on the left and everything else is happening to the right of it. We'll go down to our motion effects tool down here, and in our temporal and spatial noise reduction, these are kind of the settings that I've always just stuck with. You can kind of slide them either way around this, but these tend to work pretty good. We'll go to 3 here. We'll drop this to better. It's going to render it a little bit better, a bit more intensive on your system, but it is going to render better. Push this up to around about a 5, I think. I'm happy with that. And then over here as well, if you push this to better, you can't unlink these two, and I want to do that. So we'll keep it on faster. We'll unlink and we'll push the chroma up to like, I don't know, let's call it 9. And what's that done? You're not going to see much of it. Let's zoom in a little bit here. I'll see what I can get you. On YouTube, you're not really going to see much of it because of the compression, but this is it on and this is it off. On and off, on and off. To my eye, I can definitely see it. You might not see it in the compression on YouTube though, but where you will be able to see it is if I go back to the skin here, that's with it on now, turn it off, have a look in this section here. Don't even need to zoom in. Much cleaner, and that's cleaning up the noise across the entire image as well. So just think about that, what that's doing to skin as well, if we're going on and off there. So sticking in our skin tone node here, we've got the hand here, which is really good, but really we want to get rid of all of this orange. We want to get rid of the cheese. We want to get rid of this background because I really just want to pull the hand out of this part of the image. So if I go to our window here and grab our pen tool, I'm just going to do a very rudimentary matte around him here, and it does not have to be perfect. I'm getting rid of the cheese in here as well. It does not have to be perfect, like say if you're rotoscoping or something like that, because you're not actually pulling anything out of the image. You're just color correcting this part of the image. So it's not going to look wacky if you have a bit of a mask around things. But what you can do to clean this up is let's just do a little bit of an inside push on this and we'll soften it out a bit. Soften that there. That's going to look pretty good. Now we obviously want to track this as well because as he moves his hand through the frame, you don't want to just have this one hand-shaped mask which has a different color for the skin tone. We want that to move with his hand. So we'll move to the next one over, tracker window. I'm at the start of the frame here, so I can just hit track forward, but it's good habit to just get into doing track forward and reverse, because if you are in the middle of your clip, it's going to then obviously track forward and then reverse as well. So we'll hit that now. And the tracker in DaVinci Resolve is really, really, really good. You can see there, it's already done. I'll take this off here so you can see what's happening, and it's just tracked through in forward and reverse. So now any changes that we make on this skin tone node with this power window is going to be just reflected in that hand and nowhere else. So now let's go back to our color wheels here. I'm going to click just here out of the tracker window so that we don't have the mask around it. It's just easier to see. What I'm aiming to do here is one, I want to bring down the exposure on his knuckles a little bit. So we'll start by doing that with the gain here. We'll just drag down the exposure. You can see in our parade on the bottom right-hand side there, it's doing that. Bringing it down kind of in the mids a little bit, but it is helping with our highlights there. Happy with that. Do it in our mids as well. That's looking nice. In our shadows, I want to put a little bit of blue into his skin. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but there is quite a lot of blue in skin. In our mids, I'm going to push that to orange. And again, micro adjustments. And then in our gain, I'm going to push that up towards red a little bit. Now, the saturation of that is a bit too much, so I'm going to pull that back. And then with our offset, I'm going to bring up the luminance of that a little bit more. So now we're bringing up the overall luminance, but we're not doing anything in terms of like clipping our highlights. So I'll show you what this looks like. I can do Command D to show on and off. It's very subtle, but that was with it off. It's a little bit more washed out. You're losing any detail in his knuckles here, and this is with it on. We've pulled all of that detail back in, especially this is a hero part of the shot. You know, we kind of want this to look as realistic and vibrant as possible. One last thing we can do for skin, and this works really well on faces, but we're going to try it on this hand as well a little bit. You can use the mid detail to actually pull out some detail in the skin and just start to soften any blemishes. So we don't want to go crazy with it because I'll show you what happens if we do. We kind of get, you know, milk hands, baby skin. But if we pull this back to say, I don't know, let's say, 20 or so, -20. I'll show you with 0 and then -20. It's subtle, but it's definitely there. You don't want to go too far with it because you can really pick it up in motion. It will start to look a bit weird. So if I scrub through it here, you can see that this hand is tracked through the whole way. So I'll turn this node off and then turn it on. You can see it's tracked the whole way through just on his fingers there, tracked the whole way through. Now, next thing I want to do is I want to make this cheese more vibrant. You can see the background is really vibrant, but we want to make the cheese more vibrant. So we're going to do exactly the same thing. We click on the skin node here and we hit Option L. It's going to bring another layer underneath. I actually want the hand to take precedence because the cheese will be underneath it. So I'm going to layer things like this. I'm going to label things so we don't get confused. This is cheese. And we're going to do exactly the same process. So I'll move through it really quickly. We'll take the qualifier tool here and we'll try to just grab a nice, that one's going to look really good. A nice pull of our cheese there. We'll blur things out a bit on here and then we'll do a quick matte around this to make sure we're not getting any other part of the image. It's fine to get a little bit of his fingers here. I'm not too worried about that. They're all very similar colors. So we'll go here and we'll track that back and forward. Great. So let's undo that. We'll go back to here. So we've lost the matte, but we're still on our cheese and we're going to do very much the same thing. But this time in the gamma, I'm going to push it more towards yellow. Look at that. Even just with a little push there, that's looking way more vibrant. That's like, you know, that's a cheese I want to eat. And then in the shadows, we'll just play around a little bit, see what works. Maybe a little bit of blue again. That's happy there. Wonder if I can pull the saturation down a little bit. Now we are seeing a little bit in his fingers here. It's being changed. So I actually am going to go back in and change our matte here. So I'll click on this so you can see it and we'll just add a couple more points in here so that we're not getting his yucky fingers here. All right, now that I've refined that mask, let's go back and retrack this. It's going to take a little bit longer this time just because it's more complex, but it's not long at all. And we'll go back to here and you can see that's looking a lot better. If I go this on and off, we're not getting as much spill through and that cheese is looking nice and vibrant now. If anything, I'm going to push this back to 50% here and it's going to look nice and vibrant. I'm really happy with that. So what do we do here with the ambience? Let's go and bring the background down a little bit. I'm going to bring my shadows. Actually, I'm going to bring my shadows down. You'll see that there. It's just going to drop off at the bottom of the frame. Play with our mids a little bit and then our highs a little bit there. I really like this. You're getting a nice hard light on his hand at the back here, but it really melts into the background versus the nice skin tone that you're getting up here. I also think it's a little bit too saturated. So let's drop this down to 30 and that looks brilliant. So if we highlight this and we go Command D, we'll show you what we've just done in that. So that was our balance. And now we've turned our skin tone on and we've corrected those knuckles there. We've made our cheese more vibrant and our background has been dropped down. We're starting to look like we've got a grade on our hands. Moving on to look here. we've already kind of dialed in the look a little bit, but what we can do is we can just start to play with the offset wheel here and see if we want to brighten up the image, if we want to make it even moodier. This looks pretty good to my eye here. I'm looking at my scopes as well, my parade down on the right-hand side. I don't want to clip those blacks too much, but I'm pretty happy with that there. And overall, I think there's still a little bit too much red in the image, so I'm just going to push it a little bit towards cyan. And I'm happy with that. But what that's done is it's changed the skin tone for me. So I'm going to go back into the skin tone here and just offset that in the opposite direction. And this is how you can use the offset wheel. Beautiful. All right, so now we're in look. Let's just, take stock of where we've gone from. We've gone from, this kind of yucky, almost muddy matrix looking thing here to this beautiful, vibrant piece of footage, beautiful skin tones. The produce looks nice and bright. And then we've got a little bit of mood happening around here. It just kind of drips off into the background as well. I really like the fall off that's happening on his hand at the back here. Now, the final thing we can do if we want to add anything more to it, so we can go to effects here and I'm actually going to zoom out a little bit, move things around so that once our effects come in, we can see them. So I've just moved these around a little bit so that when we go into our effects, we can still see. What we want to find here is we want to search and we want to go to film grain. This is a nice way to add just a little bit of texture to the end of your process here. You can pick a whole bunch of different things. One thing I do really like seeing, and I see a bunch of colorists who do this, especially on YouTube. Actually, I'll show you how to do this here. If you go to Chrome and go to shot on what, and you can find, let's say, I don't know, what's your favorite film? I don't know why I'm asking you. You're a camera. Let's say you're really into, I don't know, Moonrise Kingdom. Let's see what that shows us. Moonrise Kingdom. There we go. Click on that. That will show you here. If you scroll down, it was shot on Kodak Vision 3 200 here, and we'll go back to DaVinci. So it's 35mm and it's 200. So we'll go 35mm 200T. We'll jump that on. We can increase the grain size here a little bit. We can increase the strength a bit. And what I'll do is I'll zoom in so we can see it here. Hopefully you'll be able to see this on YouTube. So here's me playing with the grain size there, the grain strength. We don't want to go too crazy because, we don't want to oversell the effect and then have people go, well, that's obviously fake. We'll crank the softness up a little bit and then we can just blend it down a little bit as well there. So this is with it on and then off, on and off. I don't know if you're going to be able to see much of a discernible difference on YouTube, but hopefully you will. We'll go back to here, fit. This is a beautiful image now. I'm really happy with this. So that's film grain. There's a bunch of other great effects that you can use depending on what you've got in your shot. If you've got lights, you can use light rays to kind of add some volumetric lighting in there. I don't know, what else have we got? We can go through here. One thing I like is actually halation as well. On this image, there's a little bit of highlights happening on the metal here. And then obviously we've got light hitting the back wall. So if we actually just drag this onto our effects node here, it's gonna just do too much. It's just gonna do the whole image. So we'll Command Z that here. And we'll actually put it on our ambience node over here because we know that that's just the background. It's just added this beautiful natural kind of glow to the back wall here. So look, I'm really happy with this. I don't want to take it any further. I'm really happy with what we've done. So let's have a look at the full screen here and see what we've done. So that's it for our color grade. We've done a color correction and a color grade. Let's go through it all. So we'll turn these off. This is our color correction here. Then we brought our skin tone up. We've got our cheese there. We've got our ambience in the background, nice and beautiful. We've pushed our look a little bit here towards cyan, and then we've added our film grain on top. It's looking fantastic. I'm really happy with it. I really want to hear how you guys go. If you've never used Resolve before, you should be able to jump into the program now, even the free version. And I've not used a lot of stuff from the studio version here. Even in the free version, you'll be able to get great results in no time at all. So let me know in the comments if this was helpful and what you want to see more of when it comes to color grading in DaVinci Resolve. There's plenty to unpack and a lot of tools that we didn't even touch on today. All right, so now that you finish your grade, you've got to send it back to your editor. Let's pretend that we've gone through and done our entire edit here and everything's graded and we're ready to send it back. We go over to our Deliver tab here And you can see we're now in a very similar tab to what our editing one was, with a few more options up over this side here. So if you just scroll through here, go to ProRes Master. When our editor sent it to us, our editor in this case being me, they sent it to us as a ProRes 444, which you can see here, clean out. Now we did this at 444 because this was shot in 10-bit. If this was shot in 8-bit, we could have just done 422, that is totally fine. Sending it back to the editor, I generally send it back to them the same way that they sent it to me. You could probably get away with sending it back at 422 on this just to make the clip a little smaller, but you know, for now we'll do it 444. So hit ProRes Master, drop down here, 444, and then everything else is fine. You've got 25 frames per second here, 1920 by 1080. You can hit use constant bitrate. You know, you're gonna get a chunkier file there, but you're gonna get a more consistent render for the editor to be able to take it back into Premiere, drop it into their timeline, and then re-render it again out. So the higher the quality going back to them, the better. Just browse here, send it to where you want it. Why not? We'll send it to right here. Color grade. Save it, add to render queue, and that's dropped it up over here. So it's over here, and then you just hit render all when it's ready. What I'm gonna do though is I'm just going to go into my edit here, and I'm gonna delete everything else that I didn't color grade and just render that one out. So let's render 444, use constant bitrate, add to render queue. It's up over here, and render all. Now, this isn't gonna take very long at all because it's one clip, but you can see there it's a pretty speedy process. And that's it, we've done our color grade. So if you've watched along, even if you've clicked along and played with your own footage whilst you've been watching this, you're now a colorist. You can ask your editor friends to send you clean outs, you can color grade to your heart's content, you can send it back to them, and they'll be wowed. But there's one last thing I wanna show you before we finish this off. So remember when I went to our gallery earlier on, you can click here and go grab still, and that's basically made a LUT internally in DaVinci Resolve, which then you can add to other things. But if you go up to here and you go clips, and now remember I deleted everything else in my timeline, so it's just this one clip here now. If you right click on this clip and go generate LUT 33 point cube, that's gonna give you the option to generate a LUT. I'm just gonna bring it over here and we'll call this cheesy LUT. Save. What's that done? Well, let me show you an example. I'm just gonna open up Premiere Pro here, right in the middle of this tutorial. We'll do a new project. We'll just send this straight to our desktop and we'll just call it cheesy LUT example. We'll quickly bring in our piece of footage that we've been working with here and we'll just create a new sequence from clip. Who knew that you were getting a Premiere Pro tutorial in the middle of this DaVinci Resolve tutorial? Sneaky, huh? We'll go down to our shot here just to prove what we're doing. This is our shot. Let's go back to a nicer frame and we can go to our color tab up here. We can go browse for input LUT. You guessed it, we can grab our cheesy LUT here that we've made and apply that. And there we go. We've just generated a LUT from DaVinci Resolve, which we're now using in Premiere Pro, as easy as that. And we have the ability to tweak it even further still with Lumetri. So that's it. There's so many tools that you can use in the round trip between Premiere and DaVinci Resolve, or even just sticking in DaVinci Resolve itself. It's a fantastic program that I really urge you to check out. I have a lot of fun working in it. Literally every time I open it, I learn something new, and I hope you've learned something new today as well. So this tutorial has been brought to you by Envato Elements, which is a really easy to use subscription service that has millions of assets on it. And with one easy per month fee, you get unlimited downloads of all of those assets. And these assets include stock footage, stock photography, templates for things like DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro, After Effects, and of course, a ton of LUTs. And we talked about LUTs earlier in this process. They're such a really good tool to start your color correcting process and even push further into your grade. So check out the LUT packs on Envato Elements. There's a lot of great authors up there doing fantastic color grading work to help you get started. So check out the link to Envato Elements in the description below and subscribe today. I promise you'll have a lot of fun on there. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Happy color grading.